My name is Chad Simmelink. We're in Jewell County, Kansas, north central Kansas. We have a mixed crops and livestock operation. We are full no-till with cover crops, and our livestock operation is a bred heifer program utilizing the cover crops and the native range. Grew up here on this property for my whole life. We went full no-till in 2003. We used some no-till before that, but all of our acres been no-till since 2003. We started utilizing rotational grazing on the native range in the mid-2000s and really have been impressed with what that's done to our native range. Our species diversification has really improved, and the more desirable species of the native range grasses has really ramped up. Corn, soybeans, wheat, most of our cover crops go in after the wheat. We do some cover crops after soybeans and corn. For our area and for our operation, with the grazing of the cattle, we get a lot of tonnage after wheat since we have a bigger time frame there to grow the cover crop. So we really like planting the cover crop after wheat harvest. We're not cow-calf or true stockers, but we do a bred heifer program where we bring in replacement heifers, we breed them, run them through the summer, then sell them the next fall. So it's a little different, but it gives us the opportunity to match our cover crops to the cattle at different times of the year. The no-till works really well in this area. We've changed from being a wheat, sorghum, fallow operation to with the no-till now we are cropping every acre every year and even adding the cover crops after the wheat. And we've moved from more grain sorghum to corn. So advantage of the rainfall versus the runoff has really increased our productivity per acre. When and why did we start planting cover crops, which is a good question. I started dabbling in 2005. And the reason I did that was we had soybeans to where we had grazed the milo stalks ahead of the soybeans, but we only grazed part of the field just by logistics of the way we got the fence put up. And when I had the soybeans that next year, you could tell right where we hadn't grazed. Now we did graze the milo stalks a little harder than we normally would, but just the loss of residue there compared to the milo stalks we hadn't grazed, it was pretty stark contrast on the soybean yields next year. And so we still wanted to run the cattle across the cropland, but I was like, how can we raise extra residue and remove some of that residue and kind of still stay, at the residue levels we want to be. So that's why we started planting the cover crops into the wheat stubble. So basically we were trying to increase residue in the wheat stubble and then graze some of that. And then we were staying off of our milo stalks, so we weren't grazing the milo stalks as much. And that kept our residue levels more even across our crop rotation. So that's how we started in the cover crops, the reason we started, and then we just found other benefits from there, and we've went to the more diverse mixes like you can see behind me. When we started, it was just a single species of German millet, and now we're planting the cocktail mixes of cover crops, and the things we've seen in the soil from the mixes has been cool to see too, and eye-opening. It's been an ever-evolving process, and it's still evolving. We still don't have it all figured out. Yeah, so profitabilities went up, and it's a whole different world from when I was a kid of what we do. We don't spend hours out there V-blading summer fallow. Now we're just doing crops and checking crops and managing those. On both the crop ground and the native range, we've seen the improvement in the infiltration. On the native range, it was a very neat process. The hills that were shot through the video used to be the way we filled those ponds was from runoff from big rains. Well, once we improved our native range and improved the ground cover, the big rains did not fill our ponds right away, and it was actually concerning. But what we noticed was just the springs running throughout the whole year filled our ponds gradually through the year. It was a very neat process. It's one of the coolest things I've ever seen from the rotational grazing. So yeah, our species mix has changed over the years, and we've incorporated different grasses and different broadleafs over different years, and it's always changing based off what I see in the cash crop after that. So sometimes we mix it up a little bit of trying to find that balance. It's not a short-term game, it's long-term, and every year is another learning experience, and we kind of adjust from there. Soil tests are ways that we could analyze that. I don't think none of them are perfect yet, because you got a very complex system and a lot of things are going on, and so it's hard to measure that and know what you're going to have, especially when the cover crop's growing, because maybe they're definitely probably not going to show that they're available, but they might become available next year for the corn crop. or milocrop or whatever you're growing, but how do you know? You don't exactly know. So it's more of an art to me after the years we've found is we can watch the cover crop grow that summer after the wheat, and you can get a little feel like, okay, this looks like this could be a problem next year, so we need to watch this nutrient for the following cash crop. There's no way of just punching something in the computer and saying this is what we need though. It's more of an art or a sense, a feel and a gut feel to it. The herbicides went down. We've gotten by to where we've used 0 herbicide that year on that acre. And we've actually made it into the growing corn crop and not utilize any herbicides on some occasions. So it reduces the number of passes in the summer in the wheat stubble, which is nice, because some of the resistant weeds we're having to use some herbicides that aren't real fun to handle. So that's been nice. Fertility-wise, I think that's still a balance we're working through. I wouldn't say on our operation that we've cut fertility. Some of our yields have went up per bushel produced. Yeah, we're still staying within a level I'd like to be in. Some of the struggles we've seen on our farm is I don't worry so much about the water use. I mean, I'm not saying in a dry year that's not a concern, but I think something that's held us back is just nutrients. So we're cycling more of these nutrients, which is a good thing. But as we're building our organic matter levels in the soil, we're also tying up some nutrients, and not as maybe it takes nutrients to build organic matter, but we also need the nutrients to grow the crops. And so those are some of the things agronomically we've had challenges with and we're still working through. And so it's not quite as a simple a system. The management has to go up compared to just if we planted the wheat and sprayed the wheat all summer and planted our corn the next year versus putting the cover crop in after the wheat. Yeah, we weren't as bad in this area of the state as other areas this year. We were fairly fortunate. Sometimes in my short term I make some changes. So yeah, when we're dry, sometimes I won't plant right after wheat harvest. I'll wait for a little bit, which will probably cause us to have to spray the wheat stubble, make a herbicide application, and then we'll plant later in the summer, just so it's not using as much. In some cases, if it was really dry, I'd still want to plant the cover crop, but if it got really bad, we would maybe terminate it before frost, because usually we let the cover crops just go to frost. But we haven't pulled the trigger on that over the years yet, but that would be an option too. So on our grazing of the cover crop, we use a strip grazing system. It really helps utilize the forage there, but also leave the residue levels that we would like to leave on top of the soil. And we found that's been very beneficial. We've probably, in a very simple test I did, we increased utilization of the forage by 80% and still left the ground cover that we deem as necessary. And so we'll strip graze, we'll move them anywhere from every day to every 2 or 3 days, depends on our time, what we have as labor, and the situations of the cover crops. No, well, I got lots of ideas. Yeah, so the future for our operation, we've toyed with some perennials. We've done perennials actually on croplands on a field like this that we've grazed for 4 years, and then went back and did cash crops, and that's the way we're looking at to really cut our fertilizer use and keep our fertility up there. We've done some of that, and we're still kind of going through the results to see how we like that system. So those are things we're looking at, is just things that we can put some perennials into the system, because that's when we found our infiltration rates really went up in the cropland, is by putting the perennials in, and that would be the way in our system it looks to reduce our fertility inputs would be with a perennial graze system. They have more root mass than these plants, so that's why the infiltration rate goes up, is because the root mass is a lot denser and does a lot more to get water going in the ground than these annuals. They're like, oh no, I got planted and I got to survive before it freezes. So they're just like shooting shoots up above ground and putting seed heads on, right? Because they got to make new seeds. Or the perennials, they don't need to make a seed to survive the next year. They're just going to come back from the roots. So they're sending a lot. So where they want to survive is sending a lot of roots out, right? Because they need those to get going in the spring versus a new seed. So yeah, nature is smart. So.